And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Social. It's funny because I fucked that up recently in the introduction. I was like, here we are for an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. And I'm just like, oh, no, I guess that's just how that's going to happen. And I remember at one point that would have driven me nuts. Like, I would not have been able to just reconcile that at all. It would have had me thinking about it and doubting myself for days. And I find it really funny that I'm at that point in my life now where it's just like, it is what it is. You're just going to have to deal with it. And recently, when I was in Paris, I had the experience of going out for a beer with a couple of friends, one of which was at the retreat in the Netherlands. And because because cannabis is basically still illegal in Paris, we had to be careful about where we were rolling joints. So it was the end of the night. We ended up at this pub that redefined dank and like mildewy. I can't even go on to describe the atmosphere, but it had a Jolly Roger on the front of the bar, which is the old pirate flag, right? The skull and crossbones. I was like, aha, we got to go here. So we did. And we were the friend from the retreat was rolling weed, and immediately you could see the bouncer in the back just nose in the air like, uh-oh, you could smell it. And so as the bouncer's wandering towards us, I just decided to go over and just start suggestively dancing with the person, just like, hey, how's it going, right? Trying to get them to dance with me. And that immediately made them go away because they didn't want to deal with me, allowing our friend the time that he needed to roll the joint. And it was just funny to me because at one point it would have never occurred to me to do that. I would have like all panicked, like, oh God, put it away. What are you gonna do? And now I'm just like, hey man, you want to dance? How's it going? Where are you going? All right, bye. The night moves on. And I think that's it. It's like, why not? What would be the danger there? That some stranger thinks I'm weird? That some stranger's going to judge me for a very small amount of time until they move on to the next strange person in this very dank, weird little bar. But we don't think about any of that stuff when we're afraid of judgment, right? We're just afraid of judgment. And because we're afraid, we go, well, it's a good reason to be afraid. Well, I have lots of reasons to be afraid. Well, you would be afraid too, blah, 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 blah. And it's just, why? You can be afraid and still look at it and do something else. You can dance. You can look at the source of your fear and just dance in front of it and make it uncomfortable. And all of a sudden it will wander away, allowing you to enjoy the rest of your life.
I love that. Yeah. And how often that's the case, like when you are tense and rigid and worried about something, like those sort of thoughts never come up. Like those ways of seeing things, or the kind of off the beaten path, or the response you typically wouldn't have, won't come up when you're thinking about, like, oh gosh, what's going to happen, what are they going to think. Like, even, right now we're doing a live stream on Instagram. Like, people are going to come on, they're going to watch a little bit, they're going to go away, and then that's just it. It's just like a little blip in their day, and people will put so much weight on these tiny minuscule little situations. And yet, how often do we come across something, fleeting thought about it, and then we move on with our day and go back to worrying about the myriad of things that we were worrying about before, or considering before, thinking about before. And yet we'll focus so much on how we think something's going to be looked at or perceived or judged. And so it'll, like, handcuff us from being able to see things in other ways, or take a new path, or have a different consideration. And just that attitude of nonchalance, like how uncommon that is, like the ability to just, like, how, and especially in my life, like, with how rigid people have gotten, and just like, yeah. And we get a lot of people asking this when we'll live stream, like, we don't come on with a topic in mind. We don't have some idea of like, okay, today we're going to talk about, overcoming social anxiety or something. And we have these three markers and these three steps to do it. It's like, now we're just getting on to chat, and then I'm seeing some of the comments on the side here. Yeah, Jazz, you're funny. And how you can just do something and show up, and, like, things have a way of working out. Like, I find that a lot of times in certain situations, I'll have like some concern or some worry come up, and then it continues to play out and continues to play out and continues to play out. And then all of a sudden it makes so much more sense. And that thing I couldn't possibly understand when I was initially worried about it. Once I relaxed and just kept allowing it to play out, it made more sense. But I couldn't have understood how it was going to play out when I was sitting there having not gone through the thing. And I was just talking with someone recently about just uncertainty and just how, in our own lives, like, definitely, I know Ray for sure has a lot of uncertainty and things up in the air. I feel very similarly with a lot of things in terms of just a number of things going on. And it helps me to remember that there's going to be a point where, as long as you just keep living, keep doing things, not getting too overly concerned with figuring out that answer, like getting to that conclusion, things have a way of playing out, things have a way of making sense. But maybe they won't make sense for a month. And there's going to be a bunch of things that happen for the next month that'll then make it make more sense once you get there. But right now, you can't possibly understand because you don't have the context yet. You haven't gone through the things yet. You haven't done all of the things that are going to get you to the spot where something does make sense or you gain some clarity. And so a lot of our lives when things are feeling very unstable, uncertain is just having that patience and the willingness to continue to go through things, and like they'll start making more sense. And the more attention you're paying to things that are actually happening, not the fear of what might happen or what could happen, the more you notice certain things. And like it's that attention that you're giving the experience that you're having, the moment that you're going through, that informs all of those things you're so uncertain about. It's like things start making sense because you're fucking paying attention to what's actually happening as opposed to focusing on what you're so afraid of might be happening, missing all the things that are actually happening because as you're uncertain, as you're unsure, as you're concerned about what might be happening, like there are things still playing out, like there are still things happening, there are still things you can do even if you're not feeling super incredible or you're a little bit uncomfortable or you're a little bit concerned or worried. Like focusing on that doesn't help open up the doors or give you the clarity to understand or gain context about what's going on. And sometimes it's just going through it and like continuing to go through it. And you're going to go through the worry, the fear, the anxiety, the concern. And then as you keep paying attention, as things keep playing out, things start making sense. But like right now, there's no way for that thing to make sense until you get through the things that you're going to get through, that then things will start making more sense. And so, long story short, it's kind of just like fucking continuing to go through. Like, there's no thing that I'm ending this with that's like, this is what's going to solve everything. It's just like keep paying attention. Things are going to keep changing. Things are going to keep moving and shifting, and you're going to keep moving and shifting as everything else is moving and shifting. And so the way you see yourself will even be different than you're seeing yourself right now. And the things that you're considering are going to be different moving forward because that's just the inevitable reality of reality is that like things are going to keep changing and shifting. Like keep paying attention, you're going to get the most out of those changes, you're going to learn the most as you go. But if you're very very afraid and afraid that things aren't going to work out in a way, or you're hoping they're going to work out in the very specific way that you think they should work out right now, as opposed to realizing like, you know your way of them working out might be different in a month than they are right now. So keep paying attention, and eventually you'll find out what that is.
I remember the one thing I would repeat over and over and over again when I was teaching Wing Chun was don't judge your progress. Just don't judge your progress. And the reason is because you just don't have the clarity to do so. You don't have the context. Like if you did, you'd be a master, right? But the farther down the path you go, the more you look back and go, "Oh wow, have I ever covered a lot of ground?" But we don't often do that. And it's because we're so busy judging ourselves for what we're going through. But it always reminds me of the quote from Buddha that we are forged like steel through fire. And it's only going through it that we really see what we're made of, that we're actually able to see what we can become, what we can go through. But if you never go through it, then you never really know. And if you don't really know, then it becomes kind of a lingering fear. Right. And so that's often why we go out of our ways to kind of do things that prove to ourselves that we can do those things until we're like, I don't need to prove shit. I'm sure if I threw myself in there, I'd do it. And to actually know that really is just the backbone of everything, because then you just don't fear things. You just don't fear the experience. You might, but you're like, yeah, but I've feared a lot of things before that. And I got through that. It's more of a matter of factness than anything else. And that only comes by going through it. That's why the benefit of age is context, but not without clarity. Because you can be really caught up in yourself and miss all of the lessons of your life. You can miss all of the underlying messages that you've been picking up the entire time about holding on, about attachment, about suffering as a whole. You don't have to be focusing on any of that. You can focus on praying to God and waiting for the afterlife. You can focus on all kinds of stuff except your experience right here and now. So it's interesting. You're just talking about growing up. That's all we're ever really talking about. That's why we make this podcast. We make a podcast, by the way, everyone, called Dualistic Unity. For me, I'm just leaving an ongoing conversation for my daughter and thus anybody else, really. And it's just a conversation about growing up, not becoming an adult, because God, that sounds dreadful, but actually growing up, like becoming more of what we are in the same way that a seed becomes a tree. Right? It's not all of a sudden like the seed's like, I'm a tree. Now I'm more. Like it was always the potential of that tree, and it just became that tree. And that's what we're doing all the time, but not unless we're willing to go through the hardship of growth. But we keep trying to get to a place where like now we're an adult. Like it's so funny because my daughter is 16, as you know, and she has this idea that, at 18 you're an adult because that's what the law says. It's like, yeah, but that there's a reason that we do that. It's because we don't actually know anybody well enough to go, yeah, you're responsible. Yeah. We more or less feel that you have enough wherewithal to make decisions for yourself. So we're just like, well, around 18, you know, you should. And so that's the age that we arbitrarily pick, but it's not actually a line indicating that you're something else now. You haven't graduated from, child to adult. Nothing's changed at all, in the same way that you don't become a year older on your birthday. You become a day older on your birthday because that's all that's ever happening. But all of a sudden we're like, I'm 1 year older. No, you're just 1 day older. It just, but that's the whole point is we have this idea like we're achieving something rather than life being this ongoing grind, which gives us the opportunity to recognize why we're grinding against it, why we're in such a state of resistance, why we're always fucking resisting everything that's happening and worried about it, fearful of it, running away from it, or trying to bulldoze through it. And that's the lesson of life, is why are you not aligned with what's happening? And it's often because we don't realize what's happening is us.
All said. Yeah, I've had that thought about birthdays before, that we should actually change our age at 6 months at our half birthday. Like when we're 6 months old, we should be one, because technically we're closer to being one than zero. And then like at 1.5, we turn two. That would make a lot more sense, instead of being like a year and 99% towards two, and then turn it into that. So kind of along those lines. But with the change and the growth too, and just like running with the tree example, like trees grow in two directions at all times, right? Like they're always growing roots as they're growing up. We only see the one part and expanding, exactly. And like all plants do that. And we kind of discount that, and how often like nature is so reflective of us, because we are fucking nature, and we forget that very often. And so of course, if you think about a tree, you see the tree part, but there's roots digging in. And so, you go through a period of your life where things are less comfortable, less certain, more unstable. You're worried, you feel like you're losing all this progress. It's like, because yeah, technically, like if you're comparing us to trees, like we're grown in two directions at all times. So we could confuse the digging in of roots as going, regressing or losing progress, when really we're just gaining more context, gaining more depth, gaining more understanding. Because the other thing is, you can't understand an experience unless you go through it. And so we're striving, and I certainly get caught up with trying to be perfect, like a ideal version of myself, the one that doesn't get concerned, never nervous, never worried, always well spoken, always clear, always concise, always, funny in every situation, handles every social situation perfectly, making bunches of money and all this shit. And it's like, that's like no good to the world. Like the only thing that benefits is myself. Like anything beyond that isn't really much of a benefit. And so like maintaining the context of the world, of reality, and like, saying myself confined idea of Andrew. But when you start to realize, like we were talking about yesterday with both perspectives, like it's the paradox. Like you are yourself, but you're also not disconnected from anything. And so the you that you are isn't just confined to you. There's the experience of that, sure, but there's a balance to it, and recognizing yourself, you know, recognizing that you're looking into your mind as much as you're looking out of your mind. Like you're both in your mind and out of it at the same time. Like it's both. It's not one a little bit more than the other. It's always both at all times, and we can maintain the context that we're separate from everything that we're looking at, as opposed to interconnected to it. And so when that is taken into consideration a little bit more than the thoughts about being perfect all the time, or the thoughts about just like being this perfect, beautiful tree at all times with no roots that are digging deep into the dirty dirt of the earth. It's like it takes both, and there's so much more fullness to your experience as you go through all of the ups and the downs. And we don't necessarily know how things are going to work or how things are going to grow. Like things in nature don't grow linearly. Like they're going up and down and all around all the time, and they're adapting to their environment and shifting and changing. And we, the way that our world is right now, it's very much like right angles and rigid lines and structures and, linear thinking. Like on that, we think we're going in this direction, and there's no thing saying like it's not even in a direction. We're not even going in a fucking direction. We're expanding, sure, and that's from every angle though. We're not just expanding like the top half of a fucking hemisphere. It's like we're expanding the bottom half, and as the top half expands, like the bottom half must expand equally, or else you're going to have this oblong sort of fucking shape that doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. And then it's going to start coming out the sides, and it's going to be all fucking whack as shit, and there won't be the same sort of equal growth. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but my point is that we're expanding in all directions at all times. And so to have this preference that we're only going to expand in the way that I want to expand, it's like, sure, you can expand in that way, but that's also going to include expanding in all the others. And if you want to cut yourself off from expansion, you can do that. And a lot of us do that. We get very comfortable with the way that we're living, the things that we're focused on, the right way, the way of life that we've settled upon. And you can do that, but there's going to be repercussions to that too, because you're going to come across things that you aren't as easily able to adapt to. And you kind of have to stay in your little bubble and can't have conversations outside of that so much. So if you want to have those conversations that are outside of the comfort zone, or continue to grow, it's like that's in all directions. You can't have the preference of the one side you want to grow without the other one. Like growth happens in every facet as long as you're willing to let it, and that isn't always comfortable. And growth itself isn't comfortable. Growing pains, maybe kind of cliche, but like that's how it goes. Like you grow, you go through some discomfort. It's kind of inevitable, which allows you to gain an appreciation for when you are feeling a little bit uncomfortable. It's indicative that there is growth happening. You're like, okay, so yeah, there's discomfort, but if it's indicative of that, then maybe I don't have to fight that shit quite so much.
We have a comment here, and I just wanted to bring it up. Um, I feel like retreats really elevate this conversation even more each time they come around. And I wanted to say, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's because the retreats for me are kind of like a baptism through fire. And that's really what it is. Like each and every time I go to a retreat, I'm going into just a whole world of uncertainty with a lot of people that I may have spoken to before, but that doesn't mean I necessarily know. And anybody who knows me knows that I don't ask for backstory. I'm always just with the person I'm with. And so I'm not looking for some false sense of certainty like now I know you because I know your resume and the past choices you've made. And obviously you are, a intelligent individual with, good choice good abilities to make choices. Jesus, that was a terrible sentence. Anyway, point is that in the moment, I don't really care about what your story is. I'm having a relationship with you, and so it's totally in a state of uncertainty. And I'm supposed to be a host, which is not what a host does. A host is supposed to get to know his guests and try to anticipate their needs and do all that. Whereas the perspective that I tend to hold is if you're needy, that's kind of on you. Right. That's why you're coming to the retreats. Get over being so goddamn fucking needy. Right. And so it's a very different experience. And there's nothing but uncertainty. And of course, I go there not just with the intention of being there for everybody in the whatever capacity I can be, but also going through the recognition that I can't be there for everybody. There are all kinds of insecurities that go with that. And then that's not even including the shit that's going on in my life that I'm also dealing with at these retreats. And so there are just numerous levels of things that I go through at each and every one of these experiences. And each and every time it reminds me exactly of what it is that we're talking about here. It reminds me why I'm doing this. It reminds me why this conversation is so important. It's because that is the experience that we're all going through on one level or another, uncertainty. And the temptation to try and define yourself and define what's going on and form an opinion and to protect yourself from some danger that's not really there if you don't take yourself so goddamn seriously, to be able to get out of the way and see the fluidity of things, to see how your role is appropriate to everybody else's role if you just let it fucking happen. It's just an exercise in that. But every step of the way, you're kicking and fucking screaming inside, like, Jesus Christ, am I doing the right thing? And that's life as a whole. And so, yeah, the retreats really are an exercise in that experience. And when we come back from them, it's so raw. We're just like, right, this is what we're talking about. This is exactly what we've been talking about. And it's so funny to me that we look back like, have we been talking about this whole time? This clearly? Is this the first time I'm seeing it like this? It's always the first time you're seeing it like this. It's just that we get lost in false certainty. We start convincing ourselves that the moment we're seeing right now is actually like the moment we just saw when they're totally fucking different and full of potential.
Yeah, and part of us like almost wants to maintain that perspective that like things are going to keep being the same. It's like the reality that it's not going to be the same, but if I keep trying to make it be the same, I'm just going to keep fighting what's going on. And so, yeah, to continue on about the retreats, like it's certainly a practice in everything that we talk about. Just because, like and like we, I was gonna say we make them to be just like raw uncertainty, but like we're not making them to be anything, which allows them to be just uncertainty at all times. And like every single day is wake up and yeah, we're gonna eat food and like we're gonna do stuff, some psychedelics and smoke some weed and stuff and hang out and chat. But like beyond that, there's no way of having an idea of what's gonna happen. And that's entirely it's so far from like so much of what my mentality's been most of my life, what most of society's mentality is, the willingness to like just continue to step into uncertainty from like moment to moment to moment and like make things what they are, not make things what you want them to be, but be willing to realize that your experience stems from you and that it's not on someone else to make it a certain way. Like it's on you to make your experience what you want to make of it. And I think, it's certainly a lot of my life I've looked to other things to make my experience what it is, even like an accomplishment, like just accomplishing something in order to allow myself to feel better about myself or whatever, as opposed to just like being good with myself right now in whatever way that is and letting go of some ideal of what it should be. And so the retreats are very much a practice in that. And I think a big part for me has been that letting go of the just the unnecessary labels, or like what I should be doing, my idea of what I should be doing, or what how I should be acting, because I don't even necessarily maintain ideas of the right way to do things, and yet part of me does, as opposed to just continuing to do what I'm doing and like showing up there not as trying to be a host. Like that was the big takeaway I had from this last one, was that like I'm no good thinking that I'm some fucking retreat host at these things. And like I had a number of days where I wasn't thinking about myself like that, which admittedly, like I've kind of maintained in a lot of ways, at least subtly. There's at least a little bit of like, yeah, I'm a host, so that means something, as opposed to just treating it like I would treat any other week of my life, any other weekend. Because you can think that someone is expecting something of you and that you should then live up to that expectation. But like that's kind of irrelevant. You're just maintaining an expectation of yourself to live up to something. If they have an expectation, that shit's on them. Like that's their own thing that they can work through, to the point that you were saying before with like if someone's needy, like that's not on you to satisfy or like placate to, or anything like that. Like that's on them. And the less you do play into that, the more maybe they're uncomfortable in thinking like they this should be happening in this way, but they're at least left with themselves without an ability to throw it to someone else or pass it off to someone else. And then there's an opportunity right there. So you're doing them much more of a favor in not playing into those needs, or not playing into some expectation that maybe you are correct in their expectation of you, but it's still their expectation. And if you play into that, then you're just satisfying their expectations, and that's not doing them any good. Like it seems like you are, because it's short-term satisfaction in that sense, that instant gratification, but long term it doesn't actually do any good for them. It just allows some immediate satisfaction for both of you, because you're like, okay, I'm doing something right and they're getting satisfied or whatever. And and so being willing to like just go into those, just from my perspective, without some idea of like what to do. Like I don't have to have any expectation of myself to do anything any differently than I would if I was just going somewhere with a group of childhood friends or something. Like there would be no idea of a role there. I'm not showing up as like the leader of my childhood friend group or some shit. Like fuck that. And so that's the same. But like for the retreats, there admittedly has been like at least a pinch of that, because like I don't want to say that's normal, but it kind of is. Like in most retreats, I've never been to a retreat outside of ours, but I could imagine like roles are something that we play into and we think we always have to maintain. Like we're always playing some sort of role. So the best thing you can do if people are trying to let go of their roles or their ideas of what they should be is fucking let go of your own idea of what that role is. And like even as I'm talking, it's like there's sort of a release in that. And like any even of this, of like being a fucking podcast host or with social media, like having so like I still enjoy making videos when I'm going through some shit and have an insight and like sharing the insight, but how much I sort of played into that then I started think, and it's inevitable that you're going to start thinking of yourself in a certain way, but letting go of that idea is the best thing for everyone. And so I've been making more just like fucking random vlogs, or me fucking running around high off my ass and like sharing that. And like that's been more fun for me, because there's not the additional weight of like some expectation of myself to be someone who is insightful or well spoken or any of that fucking bullshit. Like it's all just weight. All the roles that we hold on to, what we think we should be, what we think we need to live up to, it's always just ourself. We're making up shit for ourselves to live up to. Like no one else is. There's no way to actually know if anyone else is expecting anything of you, and if they are, that shit is on them. Like it's not on you to live up to that. It's not on me to live up to that. And yeah, so this is just me thinking out loud and kind of realizing these things out loud, but it's fucking freeing as shit when you're not, when you don't have some role in your head of what you should be doing, because then you're just being yourself, and then you're freeing yourself, and then you're relaxed, and it's like, fuck, that's good for everyone. If everyone's relaxed, like that's the best thing. If you're rigid trying to be something, like you're not doing anyone any favors, even if you think that on the surface you might be.
It's interesting because that playing a role, as you can see, is going to put a lot of pressure on you, and it comes from this place where you're self-defining. There's a lot of egotism that goes into it, which isn't to say that there's any fault there. It's just it's a way of thinking about yourself that's going to cause a lot of consequence as a whole, but it's also going to cause pressure that you're going to run from, and you're going to find distractions, and you're going to find ways to be selfish, and you're going to find ways to lower your degree of awareness, just so that way you can maintain whatever it is you feel is your role. And there's all kinds of merry hell that goes with it, I guess is what I'm saying. And what we're talking about right there is exactly why our government doesn't fucking work. See, it's interesting because the retreats are such a wonderful exercise in personal responsibility, but individual and collective. Because as everybody knows, or everybody should know, um, our retreats, we're they are priced to make them happen. And they are priced to make them happen in a way where everybody who comes to them really is responsible for how well they happen. And if you come to our retreats, you'll recognize there are no cleaners that are hired, and except for the 9-day retreat where we usually have a chef, there is no extra staff to help with all of the chores and whatnot around the retreat. It really is a collective effort of everybody who goes there. But what's interesting is that, as such, if everybody takes that attitude, there really isn't much work. When you take a day of just picking up things when they're put down, or just cleaning them when they're dirty, and everybody puts in a little bit of time, it really just goes by rather quickly, and there's no like, oh god, I gotta do all this. It's just like, yeah, what else am I gonna do? I'm having a good time regardless. And it's such a wonderful exercise in just allowing things to happen as they do. If everybody's just personally responsible, then everybody treats it like it's their own place, and there's no expectation on anybody else. And so I find it funny because the idea of being the host, for example, it's kind of like, to me, if you were to throw a party, if the cops come to the door, somebody has to talk to the cops. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one person, but it should be somebody who knows how to talk to the cops, right? Somebody responsible enough to answer the questions and deal with it rationally, and so on and so forth. But if everybody at the party is like that, then anyone can answer the door. So there is no specific role. And so that's why I've always said that the idea of living off the grid, of creating a commune, of creating, an alternative society, of moving beyond what our current society is in terms of like widespread democracy and so on and so forth, moving into something that actually works. It'll never work by a structure that we've created. It can only work through people actually becoming personally responsible individually, and to recognize that they don't have all of those egotistical needs that they think they must hold on to, that they don't have to hold on to that role that defines them. If everybody recognizes that, then all of a sudden we start to emulate nature. And as it says in the Tao Te Ching, in nature nothing is rushed, but everything is done. And that's exactly what we do when we're working collectively in a state of responsible awareness. And it's so light. Like, the experience of the retreat is so light because everybody is there just holding up the weight together. Right? That's very much the point, is that because we all make it light, it is. Because we all make it an act of personal responsibility, because we make it an act of love, because we make it an act of our own growth, it is. That's why every retreat has had people coming away going, "Oh my god, that was fucking magical." It's like, "Yeah, because you did that. You helped everybody else do that too, and they helped you." Right? Because there is no you and them. It's all just one thing in motion, and that's why I love the retreats. It's because if there's ever going to be the potential to move beyond this fucking, let's just say, imbalanced system, then it's going to be through events like this. It's going to be through acts like this, where we recognize we can think and live differently, where we can experience life differently, and thus what we do is done differently. But it'll never happen by a structure saying, well, you have to share. You have to share. It's like that's not going to do it, because there's always going to be some way to cut corners. There's always going to be some way to move around that. It's always going to get corrupted over time. It has to come down to us. So the retreats are fucking awesome to me. I really do enjoy them, but it is a lesson to get out of the way, right? To be able to just be there and just be there with all of your attention. And that's all you need to do, because when you are there with all of your attention, that has its own action. You are more empathetic. You have a different attitude about things entirely, right? Because you're not trying to be something, not holding on to the narrative. So yeah, it's a great exercise, but it's also, again, it's jarring when you've grown up not working or thinking that way, especially around people. Right? And that's usually the thing that I deal with most at the retreats is I realize more and more why I have faith in people. Because underneath all of that suffering and all of that idea of themselves, we know exactly how to work together. We're just afraid to let ourselves. And once we let go of that fear, it's fucking obvious how well we can do it. So I just love the ripples, but yeah, it's jarring as fuck. It really is. I learned a lot from each and every retreat.
Yeah, likewise. And speaking of retreats, we got a couple coming up January or February 1st to 5th, Virginia Beach. I know Ray put the link up before, but yeah, 2 months till then. Plenty of time to figure out your travel plans and all that stuff. I feel like right now is a great time to start to get that thing planned out. But it's a fucking awesome house right on the beach. Yeah, you can see the picture down there, but you go to the website or click that QR code or in my bio, it's there too. You can get details on it. Feel free to shoot us any questions via DM on Instagram or something. And then we'll be in California near Big Bear Lake in April. So yeah, a lot of cool shit coming up. Because yeah, I mean, so much of that it comes down to personal responsibility and like the idea of working together. It's not from a state of reliance upon anyone. It's just like everyone's good in themselves. And so there's just shit left over and it's like, all right, well, I got extra stuff and like helping someone or and not helping someone, but just like being there and like helping out with stuff. It's interesting how we because we don't want to be personally responsible for our experience, like we'll come up with a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, or a thing that makes sense or a thing that doesn't make sense. And like we'll go and we'll kind of like think about things and does this fit my idea of the right or the wrong thing to do based on my idea of the circumstance, based on the idea of myself, based on the idea of this situation, as opposed to just like fucking all of that, like throwing all that out the window and just like what makes sense right now. Because any experience can be made the most of. Like any experience, anything that we go through, even when we're uncomfortable as shit, like you can still smile, laugh, have a good time, like literally doing just about anything. Like even, I don't know, first thing that came to mind that would feel like it would suck to do right now is cleaning out a porta potty. Like that one would be pretty shitty in a lot of ways, but you can still kind of even make the most of that. And so when you're in a circumstance that isn't cleaning out a porta potty, like to think that you can't make the most of that because you have some preconceived idea of what that means or how you should what you think your role is, and it's like you can adapt, like your role can shift and change from moment to moment to moment to moment. And if you're not expecting yourself to be anything or to live up to some sort of expectation, there isn't something in the way of just doing that, of just being that, of just showing up as yourself in whatever way that means. Because like I was talking before about like ideal sense of yourself, like there's no guarantee, there's no certainty that your ideal version of yourself is actually any better than the you that you are right now. It's just comfortable to think that there's something else and it allows you to maintain some degree of certainty. But like the you that you are right now, with all of your perceived imperfections, like strengths, weaknesses, all that stuff, could be the ideal version of yourself. And it's the only version of yourself, like the you that you are right now, with the ways that you act, the ways that you do things, the way that you live your life. Like, if you could just recognize that, like, you're good. Like, this is the ideal version because it's what you got, and you stop fighting every goddamn thing about yourself, thinking that it should be different. Oh, if I was just better at this. Oh, if I was just improved at this. Oh, if I could just, you know, talk this way or act this way or do this thing or be better at this, or if I could be more like this person. Like, if you can realize that all of that is inherently uncertain. Like, all those things, all those better qualities or worse qualities that you want to avoid or get rid of, like, there's no guarantee of any of that. And like, at the end of the day, what do you really want? You want to be this ideal version that gets looked at in a certain way up on this fucking massive pedestal that can't relate to anyone? Or do you want to be free in yourself, relaxed, and be able to relate and empathize with people and interact with people and connect with people? Like, this idealized version may be a lot more difficult to interact with people, connect with people, understand people, and be relaxed even, because you get to that idealized version, it's like all of a sudden everything's at stake. All of a sudden you got to maintain all this stuff. It's like getting all the money in the world. It's like all of a sudden you're super worried about losing all that stuff. You're constantly checking the stock market because all your investments are in flux and they're going up and down all the time. It's like, is that really the way you want to live your life? Constantly concerned, constantly worried, constantly afraid of losing all of these things that you're constantly maintaining. It's like the quote, who has more, the man who has everything or the man who wants nothing? It's like, I would argue that, the man who wants nothing, because then there's nothing to lose, there's nothing to fear. There isn't so much that you're constantly maintaining and holding on to. And it goes the same for possessions as it does with qualities about yourself. Because then it's at risk. Then you're taking things very seriously because you're taking yourself very seriously because you've built this version of yourself that now you got to maintain, because it's not about how you see yourself, it's how everyone else sees you. And that's the version you wanted to create, was the one that gets looked at in this perfect way. And it just doesn't, like, when you actually dig into it, as we're talking, like, it just doesn't make sense to keep striving for that version. It's like, what if this is the version? Can you relax a little bit more? Can you realize, like, this is it? Like, this is you. What if you couldn't improve any aspect of yourself? What if this was just you for the rest of your life? Like, could you be cool with that? And if the answer is yes, then why do you keep thinking you should be different? I'm just talking to myself, as
It's
always.
all we're ever doing. That's all we're ever doing. We just like to think we're talking to others, but it doesn't mean they don't pick up stuff along the way, and thus and vice versa, which I wanted to mention because we have a call-in show in about 17 minutes. If you would like to join us for the call-in show, you can do so on twitch.tv/dualistic unity, or you can check out our YouTube channel for the live version there. And you can call into the show for up to 10 minutes and ask a question or share a story, or if you're pissed off with us, you can share that. I noticed somebody in the chat was just dropped a comment, y'all suck, and there was no context whatsoever. So I just wanted to say, hey, thanks for being here. We appreciate your participation as a whole, because at least you said something. I mean, you could have just drifted on by without sharing that, and you didn't. You spent the time here with us, and we appreciate you doing so, because it's all about expression. But anyway, we're going to end this here. I'm going to go and smoke a pipe. Oh, I wanted to mention, by the way, shout out to Spinach for their space cake strain. Wow, that shit is strong. If you are looking for a nice hybrid, it's definitely worth smoking. That's Space Cake by Spinach.
Fuck yeah, I'm excited to try that one at some point. But it's been a lot of fun as always. And yeah, if anyone thinks we suck, feel free to go do your own live stream and start your own podcast. Like, that's cool. You can go do that. That's the beauty of the world right now, is you can get on and talk about shit you want to talk about. You don't have to sit here listening to us, but if you are, we appreciate it. That's awesome. And yeah, we got a few more calls coming up. So hope to see somebody on the call-in show. And if not, we'll maybe see you on Patreon later or tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. And it's important to remember, I don't give a fuck if someone thinks we suck. That's not why we're here. Like, it's the whole point. If I was to base all of my decisions on what people think about what I'm doing, I wouldn't ever fucking do anything. So there you go. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. I'm going to go smoke mine. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.